News Channel 5's Policing for Profit is the fruit of a 4-year investigation that began with a simple question. Are some Tennessee police departments more interested in profiting from the drug trade than stopping it? The answer, it turns out, is an emphatic yes. As with most states and the federal government, Tennessee's civil forfeiture laws allow officers to confiscate cash on the mere suspicion that it is linked to drug trafficking, even if they have no evidence that the person with the cash committed a crime. If the owner of the cash doesn't take legal action, the police get to keep the money. To make matters worse, the drug task forces that seize most of the money are funded by forfeitures. And the officers know they could lose their jobs if they don't seize enough money. This creates a perverse incentive for the police to violate people's rights in search of cash. The police claim to be fighting the war on drugs, but News Channel 5 found that stops on I-40 in the westbound money lanes outnumbered stops in the eastbound drug lanes by 10-1. News Channel 5 found that a 50-mile stretch of I-40 west of Nashville had become a profit center for local law enforcement. The turf was so lucrative that the agency that owned this golden interdiction zone allowed other agencies to go fishing in the lucrative westbound money lanes if they agreed to kick back a third of the cash they confiscated. News Channel 5 put their news chopper to work, monitoring traffic stops, reviewing dozens of hours of police video and countless internal documents, and interviewed officials, experts, and victims across the state and around the country. Officially, the police need a reason to pull the car over and probable cause to search a vehicle. But air surveillance footage from the News 5 helicopter and police video obtained under the Tennessee Public Records found that officers were accusing drivers of weaving when the video showed they were driving straight ahead. A small businessman got stopped with $50,000 he'd hoped to use to purchase a nail salon. Another woman was stopped with $15,000 she set aside to help her family with medical bills in Mexico. A man with $20,000 who'd won it in the Georgia lottery and wanted to spend it on a car. Like so many of the victims of the for-profit policing, these individuals were people of color. News Channel 5's work on the series is a shining example of what local news can accomplish. The series exposed criminal misconduct by a police chief and prompted the resignation of a mayor. They uncovered a huge injustice in their own backyard, and they advanced the national conversation about how civil forfeitures is fomenting police corruption and violating constitutional rights all over the country. Congratulate Phil Williams, Kevin Wisniewski, and Brian Staples for their 2015 HIllman Award Prize for Broadcast Journalism.
Thank you on behalf of my colleagues. Thank you to the judges, and thank you to the HIllman Foundation. It is reassuring to know that there is still a notion called the common good. And thank you for recognizing that. We began this investigation long before it really was part of the public discourse, actually now almost 5 years ago. And we struggled early on about how to present this issue in a way that would resonate with our audience, which is really a law and order audience. And one of the things that we initially hit on was the element that some police agencies had become more concerned about profiting from the drugs than stopping it. We found that there were 10 times as many stops on the money side of the interstate as there were on the drug side. That storyline was actually picked up by the producers of The Good Wife for an episode that featured civil asset forfeiture. Probably the first time that a primetime drama had ever talked about civil asset forfeiture. But really what made this story resonate with our viewers was the story of the victims. We were privileged to be the voice for the voiceless. And in this case, these people truly were voiceless. When we first started investigating this, we drove this stretch of interstate. And I was struck by how many people of color, often immigrants, families, were on the side of the interstate. Everything was pulled out of their cars. Things were just dumped on the side while the police looked for cash. One of the stories that stood out for me was the Vietnamese immigrant who had come to America in pursuit of the American dream. He was caught, I say, with $10,000 cash. He was put into handcuffs. He was detained for 4 hours until he could prove that his money was legitimate. Not the other way around. He had to prove that his money was legitimate. There was the Mexican immigrant who had saved money for her family's health bills, the insurance adjuster. And there were many others, frankly, too many victims for us to be able to tell. I mean, there were just so many. There was a van of Mexican laborers who had $800 cash taken from them because they had a joint in the van. And the other thing that struck us was for every person who had cash taken, there were dozens who were detained for sometimes as long as an hour. All of their belongings spread out on the side of the road while police looked for cash. The other big issue that really resonated with our viewers was this notion of what happens to law enforcement? What happens to a noble profession when you add a profit motive? Finally, I'll mention, this investigation brought together some strange bedfellows. We had groups trying to outlaw civil forfeiture in Tennessee, groups that were funded by the Koch brothers. We also had the ACLU teamed up with the same people. And while we believe that we have contributed to the national conversation, in Tennessee, civil asset forfeiture is still legal. And that's because these agencies depend upon civil asset forfeiture to fund their operations. Sort of like the drug dealers, they're hooked on the money. And so, as we often say, our investigation continues. Thank you.